Today we welcome JoAnn F. Peterson of Kingwood, West Virginia, in a living history portrayal of Jenny Lind, the Swedish Nightingale. In addition to Jenny Lind, JoAnn also portrays 5 other amazing women of history: Nellie Bly, Margaret the Unsinkable Molly Brown, Mary Lincoln, Abigail Adams, and Shirley Temple Black. JoAnn was honored to do a portrayal of Jenny Lind at the Pennsylvania Chautauqua. Her research of Jenny has led her to Sweden, England, Denmark, Germany, and many places in the United States. She spent an afternoon with Jenny Lind's great-great-granddaughter, Sarah Jenny Dunsmuir, in Brighton, England, where she got to hold Jenny's traveling case and music. JoAnn has been to all of the birthplaces as well as the graves of each of the women she portrays. What you are about to experience is called the Chautauqua-style presentation, which consists of 3 parts. Number 1 is a monologue. JoAnn is Jenny Lind. Number 2, you, the audience, have the opportunity to ask questions of Jenny, so be thinking of some questions during the monologue. And number 3, JoAnn breaks character, becoming herself to answer questions as the researcher rather than as Jenny. This is the time you can ask questions about Jenny that you can't ask Jenny, such as what happened at a later time in her life. To help you understand Jenny's pronunciation of words, here's a brief lesson in the Swedish accent. W at the beginning of words is pronounced as V. What is pronounced vut. TH at the end of words is pronounced T, so with is pronounced vit. TH at the beginning of words is pronounced D. That is pronounced dat, and the is pronounced da. Joanna Marie Lind was born in Stockholm, Sweden on October 6, 1820. Today is her 200th birthday. Jenny Lind was a renowned dramatic opera star in Europe before touring the United States from 1850 to 1852. She was the very first celebrity superstar in the United States. The year is now 1870, and we are visiting Madame Lind-Goldschmidt at her home in England. So we are very pleased to welcome the famous actress, singer, and philanthropist, Mademoiselle Jenny Lind, who is with us today.
Phineas Taylor Barnum, P.T. Barnum. Do you know who this man is? Well, I had never heard of him before until Mr. Filton came to me and asked me to come to the United States of America on a tour, a concert tour. I started asking around about him, and I found out people kept using the same word over and over again. That was the word humbug. H-U-M-B-U-G. Humbug. Yeah. Do you know what it means? Well, I discovered it meant someone who stretched the truth. Yeah. But other than that, I learned that people respected him, that he was a responsible person. However, before I accepted his proposal, I made him deposit the entire amount of money that he said he was going to pay me for the entire tour. Yeah, $187,000 to put it in the bank in England before I would accept. That is a lot of money. And he had trouble raising that money. He even mortgaged his home, Afghanistan, and yet he still did not have enough money. So he went to a minister friend of his who loaned him the final amount of money to be able to bring me to the United States. They wanted to bring someone of my character for my influence, because they knew that I was a very religious woman and also that I contributed lots of money to various causes. Now, Mr. Barnum, he really did not know a lot about me, only what I have just told you. But he knew that I could draw a crowd. And he figured he could make a lot of money off of me. Mr. Barnum did not know that as an infant, I went to live in Sollentuna with the Ferndals. He was a church organist. And I loved to listen, to hear him play the music of the church. And I got to go and play in God's nature. It was wonderful living there. At 3 years old, I was back in Stockholm living with my mother. And I heard one day a military band going down the street near our house. I bent over to the piano and with my little finger, I played the notes I heard the buglers play. Then I heard, Amelia, Amelia. That was my grandmother. She thought it was Amelia playing the piano, my sister. I realized I was not supposed to be playing, so I bent and I hid behind the piano. Of course, Grandmother Tangmark. She saw me and she coaxed me out and she took me by my hand to my mother. And she said to my mother, this child will be our help. She will be the salvation of us all. I was 3 years old. At 9 years old, I was living in the widow's home in foster care. The people who ran the widow's home were my foster parents, but I loved it there because my grandmother Tangmark, she lived there too, and I would sit at her feet and she would tell me the stories from the Bible. It was a good time in my life. And I had a kitty cat. I went over to the window one day and I was sitting there petting the kitty cat and singing to it. Unbeknownst to me, the maid of a very famous ballerina, Mademoiselle Lundberg, that was the ballerina's name, she heard me singing and she went to her lady and said, you need to hear this young girl sing. So I was brought into her and I sang for her. And she gave me a letter of introduction to the Royal Theatre there in Stockholm. My mother and my grandmother, they did not want me to be on the stage. They said that only evil, loose women were ever on the stage. But I wanted to sing so badly, and my mother, she kept wanting to turn back and not to go, and I'd say, please, please, I want to sing. So finally we made it there. Herr Krallis, the music teacher, was the one that I met, and he said for me to sing. And I sang for him. And you know what he did? He cried. Yeah, he cried. And then he called in the head of this whole school, Count Puke, to hear me sing. Count Puke came in and he said, how old are you? I said, I am 9. What is this? A creche? Is this a place for the babies? But he did allow me to sing for him. And you know what he did? He cried too. Yeah, he did. So at the age of 9, I was the youngest child accepted into the Royal Theatre School. I was in the operettas and the minstrels and learned how to dance, how to walk. I had my normal schooling too of learning things about our language and writing and arithmetic and the usual things at school. But mainly I learned about acting in the dramatic arts as well as singing. When I was 17, I was given my first starring role in an opera. Agatha was the role I played in The Freischütz by Weber. March the 7th, one creature that day, and I went to bed a totally different creature because it was on that day that I learned what God wanted me to do with my life, my mission. He wanted me to use my voice to help other people, not to bring fame and fortune to myself, but to help those less fortunate, those like I had been raised. Mr. Barnum, of course, knew none of this. He did not know either of my brother, Hans. Hans Christian Andersen. Well, you've probably heard of him. He writes a lot of stories. He was madly in love with me and kept proposing to me over and over and over again, and I felt like he was my brother. You do not marry your brother, now do you? So I guess I had refused his proposal one too many times, and he wrote a story called The Snow Queen, making me the Snow Queen who kept rejecting her brother. As you know, the story is about a brother and a sister. The sister is me, the Snow Queen. He also was inspired to write the story called The Nightingale, for obvious reasons. And then he wrote another one. It was called The Ugly Duckling. Yeah, I am not a beautiful woman. I have a potato nose. But yet they say, when I go out on the stage and I perform, I am transformed into a beautiful creature, just like the poor ugly duckling becomes a beautiful swan. Yeah. No, Mr. Barnum. He knew none of this. One day, I was sitting on the beach. I was holding on my lap my Bible because I had been reading it, and a student came to me and she said, "Do you ever regret leaving the opera stage at the height of your career?" And I said, "When I think less of this and not at all of that, of God's beautiful creation, the sun as it was setting there over the ocean, what else could I do?" I was ready for a change in my life, yeah. I was tired. I had performed 677 times in 30 different operas over 11 years. When you put as much as I did into each of my performances, it drains you. So yeah, I was ready for a change. We set sail from Liverpool in England the latter part of August. We made our way to New York City, and there, to my great surprise, standing around on the docks were over 30,000 people. Some of them even fell into the river. I was afraid there would be a stampede. They were yelling, "We want Jenny! We want Jenny!" Oh, I had seen such things in England. They called it the Lind-mania or Lind fever, Lindomania. But it was just the same here in the country, where I thought not that many people had heard of me, but Mr. Barnum, he had been quite the salesman. He took out newspaper ads, and in it he talked about how I had the most beautiful voice of any woman on earth. And then he listed all the charities that I had given money to. So what the people were expecting was an angel. And I am not an angel. I can be stubborn, and I do have a temper too. Not as bad as my mother's, but I do have one. There I was in New York. Mr. Barnum started a practice that he continued throughout the entire time he was with me on the tour. And that was to auction off the very first 2 tickets. There was a gentleman, Mr. Gent. He had a haberdashery, a place where they made hats. He paid $225 for the very first tickets. Yeah, that is a lot of money. But in Providence, Rhode Island, a gentleman paid $650. Yeah, and then he didn't even attend my concert. What a fool he was. But when we were in Wheeling, Virginia, now West Virginia, there was a Mr. Michael Imhoff, was his name. He paid $250 for his first pair of tickets. He was a tailor and he wanted to make sure everybody noticed him. So he had an eagle put on his shoulders with the gold gills all over it, and the wings were down over his head like a canopy. He had on a blue swallowtail coat with bright gold buttons on it, a white vest, lavender pantaloons, and matching cravat. He was quite the spectacle, but of course he did it because he wanted people to know and to notice him, and therefore come to him as a tailor. It was a way of advertising, yeah. Well, then we went to New Orleans. We arrived by ship as well. And there were so many people waiting for me there that I became very scared. I was afraid to go down off the gangplank. So Mr. Barnum told his daughter, Caroline, to put a veil over her head and take his arm. And he led her down off the ship. Everybody assumed it was me, Jenny, so they dispersed afterwards, after, of course, following them for a while. And I was able to get off the ship unencumbered. Then we got to Cincinnati in Ohio. The crowds there at the docks were just as bad. Again, I feared for my life to go down off the ship. Mr. Barnum said to me, Jenny, I want you to put the veil over your head this time and take my arm. And I did. But I said I was not quite sure about this. So as we were leaving the ship, Mr. LeGrand Smith, who worked for him, he yelled out, "Oh, Mr. Barnum, you can't pass off your daughter as Jenny Lind." And of course, the people all thought it was funny because they had read in the newspapers about what had happened in New Orleans. They said, "Oh, no, you can't put it over on the Buckeyes. We know that that is actually Caroline, Mr. Barnum's daughter, and not Jenny Lind." So later, when they saw Caroline coming down off the ship, they knew they had been fooled, just like the people of New Orleans. Yeah. Well, I traveled many places over your country. I traveled, as you know, by boat, by carriage, by lots of different means of conveyance. There was one other place that I stopped in Pittsburgh that I actually rode in a different form of conveyance called a dray. Pittsburgh was definitely not my favorite place to perform. Yeah. Then I was in Washington, in your capital. I sang before your president, Millard Fillmore. Now, the first couple of rows were empty because they were being saved for the president's cabinet. Partway through my concert, here comes Henry Clay and Daniel Webster and the other members of the cabinet, and they sat down in the seats, that is, everybody except Daniel Webster. He stood up and he started joining along with my singing. Well, I found out that they had come from a party at the Russian embassy. And they had had just a little bit too much to drink there, I believe. Mr. Webster's wife was pulling on his coattails, trying to make him sit down. But he thought that he was just as entertaining as I was. There was another gentleman there in the audience, John Howard Payne. I turned toward Mr. Payne and sang this song directly to him. Mid pleasures and palaces, though we may roam, be it ever so humble, there's no place like home. A charm from the skies seems to hallow us there. Its seat through Davert is ne'er met with elsewhere. Home, home, sweet, sweet home. There's no place like home. There's no place like home. And I led the audience in a standing ovation for Mr. John Howard Payne for penning the words to that beautiful song. I am told it was one of the happiest moments of his life, and I am so glad that I was able to be part of it, yeah. Well, I did travel around your country, seeing many places, meeting many people. I sang the songs from my homeland, from Sweden and Norway, the songs from the operas. Many people who had never heard the operas before. In fact, after I left the United States, they started building opera houses all over. I sang the songs from the arias, from the concerts like I had done before, and the songs of a young artist named Stephen Foster, a songwriter from Pittsburgh. He was very happy that I sang his songs because it made him very popular. I sang the song Home Sweet Home in nearly every stop as well, and I know that my Redeemer liveth, from Handel's Messiah. Yeah, I performed that song many, many times. I'm known very well for singing that. One of my most memorable places to perform was at the School for the Blind in New York. The school children, they came up to me and they placed their hands on my face for to see what I look like. I said to one dear little girl, I wish that I could make you to see. And she said that one day I will see in heaven, and you will be there with me. Oh, how that touched my heart. Yeah. Much as the college students did too, in Toronto and Providence, they unhitched my horses from my carriage, and acting like the horses, they drew my carriage throughout the streets of the city, serenading me. What an honor. It was much like had occurred in Hamburg, Germany. One of those students was named Otto Goldschmidt. I knew him also because he was a student of my dear friend Felix Mendelssohn. He also had accompanied me sometimes, Otto, in concerts that I had done, and I even wrote in my diary that I had danced with him. Yeah. Well, Mr. Julius Benedict, who was my accompanist, and he led my orchestra, portrait drew the time in the United States, he wanted to go back to Europe. So I asked if Otto could come and be my accompanist. It did not take long before we realized that we were in love. Yeah, I had been engaged at other times, but they did not work out. I knew, though, that Otto was the answer to all my prayers. He was everything I hoped for. Yeah, my Otto. Well, the time came for me to leave. I had been in the United States for 21 months. Actually, I had gone to Canada and to Cuba as well. I went to Havana and performed there, and then up to Toronto. And then I was at Niagara Falls. I stood there and I sang my favorite aria over the falls as well. But the time was drawing near for us to go. I was to end my tour in New York City where it had begun. And my Otto, he came to me because there was a gentleman who had come to him, Mr. Howard, and he said that he was trying to get tickets for a very dear friend of his and was told that it was sold out. But then my husband told me, oh yes, I forgot to tell you, we were married in Boston, in your country. Yeah. So my Otto, my love, became my husband in the United States. He came to me and he said that there was a woman whom I greatly admired who wanted the tickets. Her name, Harriet Beecher Stowe. Yeah. I said, she will have the best seats in the house. So I made sure that she had 2 tickets. She wrote me a letter of thank you. Along with it, she sent an autographed copy of her book that had just been published, Uncle Tom's Cabin. I wrote back to her, giving her money to help free a family that was had been slaves and had escaped, and it was to keep by their freedom. But I wrote in that letter to her that I believe great changes will occur by and by because of this book. And I am so glad that it has happened and you no longer have the curse of slavery in the United States. I sang my final concerts there in New York and set sail in May 1852, taking along with me a quilt given to me by the school children of the United States. I am so fond of it. It means so much to me that I hope when I am buried that quilt, as well as a shawl given to me by my dear friend, Queen Victoria, will also be buried with me. Yeah, Mr. Barnum, he did not know much about me, now did he? He hadn't even heard me sing, yet he was willing to risk so much. I have sometimes been asked to return to the United States. In fact, an especially endearing letter came to me from the Ladies' Committee of the United States Sanitary Commission. I would like to read that letter to you. It is with humblest words that we request the pleasure of hearing your voice in a series of concerts to benefit the relief of wounded soldiers and their families. That was from your Civil War. The memories of your voice are still fresh in the hearts of Americans. Still more precious to them is the recollection that that voice was always exerted for benevolence and humane objects. The welcome that would await you is such as could only be given to Jenny Lind, whose harmonious notes have lingered in our ears, not only because they were delicious, but because they were the outpouring of a pure and gentle heart. I will always cherish this letter as I will my time spent in the United States. I hear that Mr. Barnum is planning to start a circus. Yeah. So if you happen to go to that circus, could you tell him something from his friend, Jenny? Could you say, Tuksamika, thank you. From your dear friend, Jenny. Tuksamika.
Miss Lind, we have some questions here. What happened in Pittsburgh that you didn't like Pittsburgh that much?
Well, for one thing, I could barely breathe. All the industry that they had there was soot all in the air, and it was very, very difficult. And of course, breathing is especially important when you're a singer. Then the Masonic Hall where they had booked me had been overbooked. So there were people on the outside that had tickets that could not get inside. They started yelling and throwing things at the building, and the noise was just so much that I could not even hear my orchestra. And so therefore I said, I will not sing. I have to stop my concert right now. Mr. Barnum thought that the crowd would disperse at that point, but they did not. They stayed there, continuing to make all this noise and frightening me. So he sent two of his assistants to go and find a gentleman who had a dray. It was a form of a wagon. And Mr. Barnum, then he left thinking that everybody else would follow him, but they still stayed. So the two gentlemen then, they opened up the basement door. I'd gone into the basement at this point, and I went out through the back of it, and then they took the boards off the fence so that I could get through with my hoop skirt and get into the dray. So from the dray, I went back to my hotel, the Monongahela Hotel, and then I got on a ship bound for Wheeling, and then onto the National Road. I rode a stagecoach down to Cumberland, Maryland, and from there I said I will never return to Pittsburgh again. I was so upset about this, about them overselling, and just the way that the people acted, as well as not being able to breathe. Yeah.
How many people were in your audiences during your tour here in the United States?
Well, that varied quite a lot. It could have been just a few people, because if something happened, like the stagecoach I was riding in got stuck in the mud, there were people that would come and help us get out. So to thank them, I would sing to them. In Castle Garden there in New York, it held 10,000 people. There were fishermen out in the water in the East River. They said that they could hear me singing even that far away. So the acoustics were obviously very good there in that particular place. But yeah, it varied from just a few people to 10,000. Yeah.
Now, there were all kinds of things named after you. There was furniture named after you, and can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, as I told you, it was called Lindomania, Lind Fever, and they started naming everything imaginable after me. Noodles, cigars in Havana, bridges, schools, hospitals, barrettes, hats, all sorts of things, gloves, you name it, they named it after me. And I believe they named some furniture after me too, because they believed that I slept in that while I was here in your country.
Was there a particular city that you enjoyed singing in more than any of the other ones?
I cannot say there was one city I preferred over another, but I did not like singing in Paris, especially at the time when I had nearly lost my voice, and that was very embarrassing. Manuel Garcia, the music teacher, I had gone to see if he could help me because I had not been trained adequately in my support. And so I was counseled to go to him, and at first he thought it was hopeless for me to learn to sing properly. So I had to go for quite a long time, not even speaking. And then he started training me. I was with him for about a year before I returned to the Swedish opera. Yeah. I love singing mostly in nature, out in the woods, to the nightingales and the birds and the things there. That is my favorite place to sing. Did you have any other questions for me? No? All right. Then I will break character and become JoAnn Peterson instead of Jenny Lind. Johanna Maria Lind-Goldschmidt.
Okay.
So you have questions
one of
for me
the
now?
main questions that people nowadays have, they saw the movie The Greatest Showman, and everybody's wondering what your impression of their portrayal of Jenny Lind was in The Greatest Showman.
Well, I nearly walked out. That might give you a clue as to what I felt. I did become very nauseous because Jenny was a woman of very deep faith. And as I told you, in my monologue, she read her Bible. She believed God gave her the gift of voice to help other people. And she is not portrayed at all that way in it. She was not a femme fatale, as they also had it. She was a rather plain looking woman in Magnus's portrait of her, a very famous one. In fact, this is a book written by Sarah Jenny Dunsmuir, who is the great-great-granddaughter of Jenny Lind, and she gave me an autographed copy of it when I met her in England, and she signed it for me. This is the painting by Magnus, and you can see how beautiful she looks in this painting. Well, it's a painting, it is not a picture. So she was not beautiful. And the actress they had playing her was. They also gave her a British accent. She was from Sweden. Why would she speak English with a British accent? I do not know. Her relationship with P.T. Barnum was as a friend. It began as a business relationship. It evolved into friendship. In fact, after she left the United States, Barnum went bankrupt 5 years later, and she offered to loan him money. They parted on very good terms, very friendly terms, even though she cut the contract short. She had been given bad advice. People were telling her that Barnum was taking advantage of her financially. And so after 95 concerts instead of the 100 she had agreed to, she stopped with him as her promoter and had to pay him money then back for breaking that contract. But she never was angry about that. She realized that without him promoting her tours, they did not do as well. So her relationship with him was not at all as portrayed in The Greatest Showman or in Barnum the musical, because the same relationship was supposedly between them, where she initiates having this romantic relationship with this married man, and it never happened. Never happened. In the movie, his daughter Caroline is a little girl. As I told you, in reality, she was about the same size and height. She was in her late teens when Jenny was here, and so that's why she could put the veil over her head and people thought it was Jenny. They made her, a little girl, but no, she was with them the whole time. And they were true in that they said she liked to dress in white. She often did perform in white. She had stage fright, and she gave to a lot of charities in her time. They know that she gave away about $500,000, and that doesn't count the people she called her pensioners, the people that she would go to their homes and give them money, out of work musicians, buying her parents a house. In fact, her parents got married when she was about 14 years old. She didn't even know they weren't married until then, so she was illegitimate. But as you know, since I've told you, she was raised in foster care a lot too. Her mother was a teacher. She would go into people's home and tutor and things like that, so she couldn't take Jenny along. So that's my feeling. I do not like the way she was portrayed in either Barnum the musical. In fact, that's the way I first met Jenny. I performed the role of Jenny Lind in Barnum the musical, and just the little bit of research I did, I found out that that was not the real Jenny, that she fell in love with Otto on her American tour and was married there in Boston in February of 1852. So, yeah.
Did she have any other suitors? I mean, she was this very incredibly famous.
She was engaged several times. Captain Harris supposedly fell asleep while she was singing to him, but he wanted her to turn over all of his money to her, and she said, no, it's my money. You know, she did eventually turn it over to Otto because she loved and trusted him so much. In fact, there was a newspaper in England that reported that he had married her for her money, and she sued them. And she won in court. She proved that her husband married her because he loved her, not for her money. And he had actually increased her money by handling it.
She lived in England when she went back to Europe?
She returned first to Dresden in Germany. That was where her Otto was from Germany. And then they relocated to England. They had a couple different homes in the London area. One was called Oakley. And then she also had an estate in Malvern, England. And in fact, I have a picture of that. In fact, I'll show you a few pictures here. This is me with Sarah Jenny Dunsmuir. That is her great-great-granddaughter, Jenny's. And that is at her home in Brighton, England. We had a lovely afternoon talking together. And she, a dear lady who passed away almost exactly a year ago. She brought out Jenny's traveling case, which I got to handle and look through, and I think Jenny's hands were on this as well. And she brought out Jenny's music. Wow. To think that this was actually the music that she sang from. That's astounding. So this is her home. It's called Winds Point, and I got to do a drive-by. It's on a private road, so the gentleman who took me had to get special permission to even do that. So this picture was taken through the windshield. I didn't get to go inside. It's called Winds Point, and it is owned by the Cadbury family now of Cadbury chocolate. In England also, I went to Westminster Abbey. I had to go to Poets' Corner because Jenny was the very first woman who was ever immortalized there. She is buried in Malvern, but this is her plaque. And it says, I know that my Redeemer liveth, from Handel's Messiah, which she was known for. In fact, Handel's plaque is not far over her head. Jenny Lind-Goldschmidt, born October 6, 1820. Died November the 2nd, 1887. So that's her plaque there. And then I had to go to the National Portrait Gallery in London to see that famous portrait. So there I am with that portrait. And I also have a picture of me with her grave, but we're going to be running over our time here. So
and her grave is in?
Her grave is in Malvern, England, like I just said. It was... Her church that she regularly attended was a very small church, so she was buried from, her funeral service was held at a much larger church, and she is buried there. They were having an exhibit when I was there with a lot of pictures of Jenny. They had just had a big gathering there, a celebration, and Jenny was the focus of that. And so when I went out and I saw her grave there alongside of Otto, whew, it was a very touching moment for me. I had to tell the others to go away and just let me convene with her for a while. She is the first woman that I did in first person. And I've been often asked, who do I want to see in heaven? I said, well, after I see my mom and dad and my Lord, I want to see Jenny.
Is there anybody, you know, we don't have any recordings of Jenny Lind. Is there anybody today that you think that might sound like Jenny Lind? Or
well, like you said, we have no recordings. We do know that she had a very high voice. She was a coloratura soprano. She sang the B below middle C, so not very low. So she did about 2 3/4 octaves. She could do, I think it was the D above the top staff, you know, way up there in the beyond. So very high voice. And they said that even when singing very softly, very high, she could do it softly, pianissimo, which is really hard to do. I know as a singer, you need a lot of support, but to get the high notes, I have to do them loudly. And I'm no Jenny Lind, that is for sure. So who do I think may have been maybe like she was? Probably the young singer Jackie Evancho. She made a name for herself as a very, very young girl, but this beautiful opera voice coming out of this little girl's body. And I think that she probably was like that. Jenny was known also for her dramatics, so she was a very good actress as well as being a very good singer. And I don't know that Jackie acts yet, so I was thinking of Audra McDonald for that, because she's both an opera singer and she's an award-winning actress as well. So thank you very much for listening and joining me to celebrate Jenny's 200th birthday. Happy birthday, Jenny.